He served as a Lutheran pastor in Birmingham during the 1960s civil rights era, then led a congregation in Milwaukee's Central City for more than 3 decades. His memoir, Strength for the Struggle, tells of his journey. Reverend Joseph Ellwanger is my special guest next on I Remember. Hi, I'm Jim Peck. Welcome to I Remember. Joining me tonight is Reverend Joseph Ellwanger, a retired Evangelical Lutheran Church in America pastor. During his more than 40 years as a religious leader, he witnessed a lot of history. Take a look.
In 1963, a bombing at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, took the lives of 4 girls. Reverend Ellwanger, the pastor at St. Paul Lutheran 25 blocks away, heard the blast. Denise McNair, killed at the age of 11, was the daughter of Chris McNair, a member of the St. Paul congregation. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. preached at a funeral service for 3 of the girls. Reverend Ellwanger read the scripture. Ellwanger served as pastor to St. Paul's African American congregation from 1958 to 1967. The civil rights movement brought national attention to the segregated South. In 1965, Reverend Ellwanger was the president of the Birmingham Council on Human Relations. He also led a group of white citizens in a march in Selma supporting the voting rights of African Americans. He joined another march to the Capitol in Montgomery and was among those who met with Governor George Wallace. He was also part of a small group of clergy who met with President Johnson, urging his support for the Voting Rights Act. From 1967 through 2001, Reverend Ellwanger was the pastor at Cross Lutheran Church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Over time, the urban congregation went from 95% white to 75% African American. Women took on leadership roles, and the gay community was welcomed into the church. In 1983, Cross Lutheran became a sanctuary congregation, providing assistance to Central American political refugees fleeing the war in their home countries. Reverend Ellwanger partnered with others to form MICA, the Milwaukee Inner City Congregations Allied for Hope. His book, Strength for the Struggle, Insights from the Civil Rights Movement and Urban Ministry, tells of his journey and the people he met along the way.
Let me take you back to 1965, I think it was, in Selma. You're leading a group of largely white men and women on a march to the courthouse steps. Mm-hmm. And you come around a corner, and what are you looking at?
I'm looking at a street full to the right, a street full of about 200 white men with bats and pipes and some mean looks on their face, and straight ahead, about 4 or 5 sheriff deputies.
Well, at least the police were there.
That was encouraging, but not too encouraging to know what was in the street. And there they were. What are they thinking, and what are they doing?
What did you feel?
Well, I was really on a mission that afternoon. It was really early afternoon by the time we made it there. And I was determined to lead this group of 72. They were all white Alabamians who were there from all over the state to say to Selma and to the state and to the nation that there were some horrendous inequities in the voter ability for voter registration on the part of African Americans, and we were there to be in solidarity with the movement that had been going on since January 1st, that's over 2 months, and seemed to be getting nowhere. So we were there to say, we stand with them.
And the police were there. There was a deputy sheriff who was kind of in charge.
Yeah.
What did he say to you?
Well, first thing he did, of course, standing in front of me, I had to stop, and the whole column behind me had to stop. And first thing that I recall his saying was, do you know a Reverend Homrighausen? And I said, yeah, that's the president of our district. Well, I have a telegram from him. And I was a little bit surprised that my bishop, in effect, would send a telegram to the sheriff of Dallas County. But he read the telegram, and it said, Reverend Joseph Ellwanger does not represent the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod in any official capacity.
Whoa. Nice support.
I was not encouraged by that.
I would think not.
But as I say, I was on a mission, and so my response to the sheriff was, well, he asked after he read it, now what do you say to that? And I said, well, Dr. Homrighausen has a right to his own ideas and opinions, but we are here this morning to stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters who are fighting for the right to vote, and we would like to proceed to the steps of the courthouse to make our statement. Now, I had no idea what the response was going to be.
You still have 200 guys over here with pipes and clubs.
Right, and we've got the sheriff deputy standing in front of us, so we can't move forward unless they move aside. So I had no idea whether they were going to arrest us, whether they were going to say, well, you better go back home from where you came, or whether they would just give a signal to the guys in the street and say, come on, because they were clearly in cahoots, or they would have gotten rid of them. Or were they going to arrest us? Because that's what they had been doing to the black demonstrators who came to try to register to vote. The amazing thing is that the sheriff deputies stood aside. We went ahead. We had our demonstration and read a statement from the steps. And then one of the things that happened that's unforgettable is that we sang America at the end as our song. That first stanza ends with the prayer for brotherhood from sea to shining sea. So we were there praying, hoping, working, standing for brotherhood and sisterhood. And as we were singing, the crowd in the street started singing Dixie.
Not exactly solidarity.
Not solidarity, but then what was amazing is that from across the street, there must have been 200 or 300 African Americans who had come. They were standing on the grounds of the federal building, which was opposite the county courthouse. And they began singing, "We Shall Overcome." Now, if you can imagine those three songs, it was an interesting concert that never to be repeated. But if anything, it was the presence of the African Americans on the other side that was the counterbalance, not only in
and you
appearance.
hadn't seen them.
We hadn't noticed them that much because they were gathering slowly. I think they may have come to make sure. They had heard that there were some white Alabamans coming to make this statement. And the importance in history for this morning was that, to my knowledge, there had not been, and even since that day, there was not a demonstration of white Southerners in solidarity with the civil rights movement. And in fact, it was not until the Selma to Montgomery March that started a couple weeks later that whites from the North really began to join the demonstrations in the South. But it was people coming from the other part of the country, not from Alabama. So this was an important statement that we were making.
Yeah, having the Alabamans there, I would think, would be a very powerful statement.
It was something that even President Johnson and the Congress had to notice. And even though in the grand scheme of things, it was not anything compared to the sacrifices that our African-American brothers and sisters had been making from during January and February and would continue to make, But it was a clear statement that this is not just African Americans working for their rights. It's something that affects all of us.
The human rights.
Human rights.
Were you, maybe I should say it this way, what was your reaction when the sheriff read the telegram from, is it Dr. Homerghausen?
Right.
Were you expecting that kind of not only lack of support, but actually antagonism?
I really did not expect it. I knew that he did not agree with me, but to this day, I do not understand. I have a human idea of why he sent the telegram. But if he really agreed, as he said in the telegram, with the goals of enfranchisement for African Americans and for every citizen in the United States, if he really agreed with that goal, but disagreed with our methodology of the demonstration, I would have expected him to just remain silent.
Would have been a real good time to remain silent, it
right.
seems to me.
And to send a telegram to Sheriff Jim Clark, who was known for being antagonistic.
I remember
hostile.
Sheriff Clark with the dogs.
Well, that was Bull Connor in Birmingham.
I'm sorry, yes. But Sheriff Clark wasn't in town that day.
He was out of town, so I got the deputy sheriff, yeah.
Probably a good thing. Hadn't you been visited by another pastor prior to this?
Yeah, one of my fellow Lutheran pastors came to the black church where we gathered to prepare for the march down Broad Street in Selma. And he came opposing what we were doing and accusing us of meddling in Selma's business, because we were from all over the state of Alabama, and technically, I was from Birmingham, although my parents were living in Selma, and I did some of my growing up in Selma, so I was not a foreigner in any stretch of the imagination. But we were from all over the state of Alabama, and so this pastor's comment was, "Why are you coming to Selma to bother us? We didn't go up to Birmingham and get into your business." And my response to him was, well, we're here today not just to speak to Selma. We're here to speak to the state of Alabama and to this nation, that what's happening here in Alabama in terms of oppression of voters and African American voters is intolerable. And so he was not very pleased, but he did not. I don't know whether he thought he could persuade us to not march, or whether he came only to be able to tell his parishioners that, well, I went and I told them what our position and my position was.
Did he think you were just out for to become famous?
He may very well have thought that that's what I was about, and even Dr. Homerghausen had a little bit of that in his imagination, and it was a very common notion in the white community in the South that all of the civil rights workers, Dr. King and all of them, were there just for ego purposes and putting on a show, and they weren't really that serious. After they were putting their lives on the line, this is not exactly the way to build up, it's not a safe way of building up your ego.
Well, speaking of safe, your wife was on that march, and I seem to remember reading that she was 4 months pregnant.
She was, in
How
fact.
did you feel about her being, and she was at the back of that group?
Well, I was, at first, obviously, I did not want her to go, but she was determined, and that's that determination on March 6, 1965, never diminished. This determination to be in the forefront of civil rights and working for justice.
Was there a point that you can think of in your life where you had some sort of experience that you said, I've really got to do something about this?
It was not so much a point as it was a journey of development, but it just gradually built up in me. And if I could point to a starting point, it probably would be when I was a high school student in Selma and going to a white public school, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, and then going with my father, who was a Lutheran pastor and was over some 30 plus black congregations in central Alabama and upper Florida. And I would go with him on a lot of Sundays to some of the circuits of African American churches in the rural areas. And I just saw the difference both in income level as well as the difference in social status. It was clear that African Americans, tenant farmers out in an old plantation in Wilcox County, which was neighboring to Dallas County and Selma, just to see and to sense that feeling of not being worthy, and the difference in the class difference between blacks and whites, and the meaning of segregation and the meaning of oppression on black people struck me even as a teenager.
You write in your book of an incident which you witnessed a black man, I think it was an auto accident, or can you tell that?
That's an unforgettable experience. It was a Saturday night, and I'm an 11th hour person, so I was actually running the bulletin for Sunday off the mimeograph machine. That's back in the days when we had mimeograph machines. And I was walking back from the church to the parsonage, which was right next to the church, at about 10 o'clock, 10:30 at night. And as I walked back, I saw something that I thought would not happen. Here was a car coming at a fairly high speed, at least 40 miles an hour, and a man had stopped his car in the middle of the street. It had stopped. He had run out of gas, and he had gone to get gas, and he was pouring the gas into his gas tank, and was one of those old model cars that had the gas tank opening right under the trunk lid. And so here he was right behind his car pouring the gas in, and here comes this car down the middle of the street, and it was heading right at him. And I thought, they're definitely going to swerve or stop or something. But the car did not lose any speed, and just rammed into this car and just
pinning him in between.
Pinning him in between. Just remembering this and telling about it gives me the creeps, because it's just such a horrible feeling. I could hear the crash, and I didn't have to go out into the street and look. I knew that this was a very serious situation, so I ran into the house, picked up the phone book, and looked for ambulance. It was before the days of 911, and I picked the first ambulance company I could find, and I saw that it was located not too far from where we were, so I called them, and they said they'd be right out, and they were there within 5 minutes. But when they pulled up, the man pulled out the stretcher, was ready to put the injured person on the stretcher, and he realized that it was an African-American man, and he said, I can't take him anywhere. We have an agreement with the colored ambulance companies that we take whites and they take blacks.
Oh.
And
this man is dying.
This man's dying, and I said, this man is so seriously hurt that he may not live. I don't have to be a doctor to tell you that. And if you don't take him to the hospital, your company may have a lawsuit on their hands. Well, he thought about it, and he agreed to put the man on the stretcher, took him to the hospital, and the man did die. It was that serious, and I knew it. But this was a vivid indication and reminder to me of how almost demonic the system of segregation and Jim Crow truly was in the lives of people.
To be in a situation like that and be the driver and see nothing wrong with saying, oh, I I can't take him. We'll call somebody else. What, Reverend Ellwanger, got you into Milwaukee?
That's a good question, and I think the only answer I can give is that the Holy Spirit called me. But humanly speaking, I can say that after 9 years of working in this congregation in the African American community in Birmingham, where I had just a wonderful experience and a lot of wonderful relationships, I had no intention of leaving the South and of leaving Birmingham or leaving that congregation. But I got this call from a congregation on the near north side of Milwaukee. It was a historically, traditionally German Lutheran congregation. And on 16th, near Walnut, and they were facing the reality that their immediate neighborhood was already something like 90% African American. This was in 1967. And so, to their credit, they had begun to integrate their school as well as the congregation, in contrast to some congregations around there that literally sent African Americans to them when they came up the steps to worship there.
Not one of our prouder moments in the history of the city.
And so this congregation called me, they said, because they wanted someone who would have the experience of reaching into an African American community so that we could really live out the gospel as we understand it, and as we want this congregation to be a congregation that does not die, but in fact reaches the people in the neighborhood. So I came with a deep desire in my own heart to see whether or not the church can live out integration. And after all, the society was calling for an integrated society, and I said, if the church can't live out integration, then how in the world do we expect the rest of the folks to live out integration? So I came to live it out, see how a congregation would really go, because they had just begun to integrate. It was still a 95% white congregation. And I came to see whether we could move a congregation into living what I would call today yet, living out the gospel in a real way.
You had, and I hate to jump like this, but you had met with Lyndon Johnson. You'd also met with George Wallace.
Yes.
What was that like? What was it like, given your feelings and knowing his, to stand in the same room with Governor George Wallace? Integration yesterday, integration today, integration forever.
Well, you know, the story goes that George Wallace, in his last months, did actually change and repent.
But that was much after you met him.
But that was much after we visited him. At that point in his political career, he was still in the segregation yesterday, today, and tomorrow era. And in fact, I was there for the Selma to Montgomery, last stage of the Selma to Montgomery March, and this was just an amazing picture of the stage, and Martin Luther King giving his really great, one of his greatest speeches. Yes. And this 20,000 people on Dexter Avenue facing the Capitol building, which is right behind the stage, with the Confederate flag and the state flag of Alabama, and George Wallace in his office, and this celebration of the culmination of this march to Montgomery, which we all hoped and prayed would bring in a strong Voting Rights Act. Mm-hmm. And to go into George Wallace's office with some 15 African American pastors. I was the only white pastor in the group. It was a very tense kind of meeting. It was not the kind of meeting where you go in and greet each other as on any kind of an equal basis.
No, he did not want you to.
No, but he almost had to, in order to face President Johnson and say that, well, I'm able and willing to talk to anybody. You know, it's just that we're working things out down here on our own schedule. You know. And I didn't say much in that meeting for a couple of reasons. Basically, because after all, the African American pastors were the one to speak. They were the ones who had really put their lives on the line. I had been involved in 2 or 3 of the marches, but not anything to the degree that they had been involved. But my presence, the fact that Martin Luther King and the SCLC staff wanted me to be there, they were the ones who named the people to meet with George Wallace. They wanted George Wallace to know that there are white Alabamans who stand with us, and we are not here to suppress you. We're here to build what King called the beloved community, the white and the black together, not blacks over whites, and a reversal of what had been, but to build a new community. So I realized I was a kind of a token, but important token there that day.
I can't imagine you being a token. I'm sorry. The book is called Strength for the Struggle by Joseph Ellwanger. Just touched just a couple of the highlights. It's a fascinating story. Thank you for writing it, and thank you for all that you've done. It's just a pleasure to have you here. And, of course, it's great to have you with us, and I hope you join us next time as we continue to remember. Thank you.